Alright, welcome to your Unit 5 supplemental material video. This is stuff that we already went over in class, and so this video is being filmed for your reference. Alright, population math. On the multiple choice test that you're going to have, you definitely need to know there are 7 billion people on the earth, 310 million people in the United States, and be able to do a basic rule of 70 problem, both how to do doubling time and then also calculating the number of people in a population based on doubling time. The crude birth and death rate, and then the birth plus immigration minus death and emigration growth rate. Not only can you look in your book, we're also going to be practicing that math in class. So you're going to have a separate math quiz that's going to go over this stuff. Alright, couple population terms. Per capita means per person. GDP is the gross domestic product. That is how much, how many dollars worth of product are manufactured within a country's boundaries. And then GNP is the gross national product. All national holdings, if you have a territory somewhere, if you have people working in other places, everything that belongs to the country is included in the gross national product. If you're having trouble with these two terms, here are some differences, but really you just need to know these words in context in case they pop up on the exam. All right, construct and read an LD50 dose-response graph. As with all graphs, it's really important to know what's on the X and Y axis. On the X axis is the toxin dose. So that's how much of a potentially poisonous substance that you give to your test critters. And remember again, the dose makes the poison. If you see here, this is a threshold toxin, meaning that it really doesn't do anything until you can see it hits 10 milligrams per kilogram of body weight of the mice that they're using here. And then you start to have some issues. Here on the y-axis is the mortality rate in percent. And what goes on the x and y-axis is always the same for these types of curves. The fact that it's in percent on the y-axis is also always the same. The particular units for the x-axis, just that depends. Now, how do you find an LD50, which is the lethal dose at which every 50% of all of your test subjects die after a certain amount of time? So you go up the y-axis to 50, you go across to the line that you've plotted, you go down, and that is the dose of toxin that it takes to kill 50% of your test subjects. It's basically a way to compare different toxins. This one, it could be 1/10 of a milligram, and this one, it could be 1,000 grams, meaning that it's really not very toxic at all. We're going to practice this a little bit more in class. All right, resource use. We tend to think that developing countries use more resources than developed countries because there's so many people there. Well, per capita, they use less. The reason I have these pictures, they're fascinating, by the way. If you're interested in them, absolutely go to these different places. It's one of those things that as a country, the United States may use less than a place like India, but then if you look at the per person amounts, we use way more than the average Indian person from India uses. So you can see here, this is somebody's house and all of their furniture, and they pulled out the things they are the proudest of, and you can see all this stuff. Here, this particular country, yeah, they even brought their food out as some of their most prized possessions in the few dishes they have in their family bed. And then you can see the house that is here. While we're here talking about developing countries, realize that bushmeat is any non-traditional wild meat source hunted for food in Africa or Asia. A couple of things with this. It's going to deplete endangered species if they are endangered, because if you're starving to death, you really don't care if something is endangered. It also may increase the risk of spread of disease that humans can catch. Please realize not every disease on the planet that an animal has, humans can catch. However, sometimes mutations occur, and we would never come across these if people were not eating bushmeat, as they usually go deep into a forest or a jungle or a place like that and come across a new disease and then bring it out with them. All right, another way that you can look at developed and developing countries is look at what we're eating. Look at this developed country. Lots of processed food, lots of food. You can see refrigeration and shelving in the back. This whole area is devoted just to the keeping and preparation of food, although you can see there's not a lot of preparing going on here. This particular family is bigger, and you can see here that there's really no place for storage, long-term storage of food, and so that's why a lot of the things that they have are either eaten right away or treated in such a way that they can be kept long-term. Also notice the significant absence of meat on this particular table, which means that things like kwashiorkor could be a problem in this particular country. It also affects how tall the children grow to be, and you can see that these folks are not the tallest. All right, a concept that you may want to be aware of is something called cultural carrying capacity. That is the optimum level that would allow most people to live in reasonable comfort and freedom without impairing the ability of any planet or of our planet to sustain future generations. The question, of course, is who decides what comfort is. What we consider to be comfortable living here in the United States, think about the things you consider to be minimum for living. Are those actual needs or are they wants? Why is all of this an issue up here? There is a huge growth in developing countries, and they look towards developed countries for their idea of cultural carrying capacity. So, if we all live the way that the U.S. does, there's going to be problems. All right, be aware of the concept of baby boomers. They were born between 1946 and they should say 1956. I need to fix this slide. Why is this an issue? Right here. First thing, think about the job market. At age 65, they started retiring in 2011. So you can see here this huge glut of folks moving through, and we've gone from a rapidly growing population to one that is stable and maybe even declining. Because of this bump of older folks, it means that experienced workers are retiring, being replaced by less experienced workers, shifting the economy towards the needs of older individuals. Now, of course, how does this impact the environment? It means different resources need to be used. Are they conservation minded? It's hard to say. All right. And again, if you have populations made of mostly older people, you can all of a sudden find your population dwindling. And this can be an issue because you don't have enough younger people to go ahead and take the place of those older people. All right, you can stop here and take a look at all this stuff. All right, migration. That's one of the ways that new folks come into an area. Just be aware of different ways, different reasons to move. Economic improvement of yourself, but then also experiencing freedom, getting away from wars, and then environmental refugees. Places where the land has not been cared for. A great example of that is Haiti. You have an area where the preservation of forests was not a top priority. Then there was the earthquake, which devastated the country and shook a lot of the topsoil basically into the sea, leaving a lot of barren soil. So folks did have to leave because they didn't have their homes were gone, and then they didn't really have anything to rebuild with. So they could be considered in some ways environmental refugees. The United States has always been a destination for immigrants. You can see during the Great Depression, nobody was interested in coming here because we could barely support the people we had. And when you see things like this, like a huge spike in immigration followed by a huge crash, that's probably because immigration laws were tightened. Think about the implications of not allowing immigrants into a country where the population is declining. It's kind of counterintuitive. All right, realize that there is a drop in total fertility rate in the United States, but our population is still growing and not leveling off. Yes, we do have immigration, but also people are living a lot longer. And so even though we have less people being born, less people are dying. All right, and here you can again see that the total fertility rate is dropping below replacement level, which means at some point, if we keep immigration from happening, we are going to see our population starting to decline here in the United States. This is maybe some interest to you and some things to tuck away in your head of changes that have taken place in the past 100 some odd years. Be aware of the things that go into life expectancy. Why are we living longer? It's everything from increased food supply, so there's more food security, to there's better nutrition within that food, medical advances, improved sanitation, and then the older you are when you get pregnant, you're more likely to survive that experience because you're more likely to seek prenatal care and also have the pregnancy on purpose. I beat this into your head in terms of if we empower women, in other words, women can have jobs, women can be educated. That is one of the number one ways to slow down population growth. Here you can see, as well as getting water, women are expected to go get firewood every single day. Think about one of the things you should think here is that the soil has been degraded here, and then think about the deforestation ring that goes around around a village. You just have increasing areas of clear cutting where you then lose, where you can end up with desertification. All right, and again, gathering the water is usually a woman or a girl's job. Typical day. You can stop and look at that. And then this is, to me, a dramatic graph. On the left is a bar graph showing female literacy rates, and on the right is a bar graph showing the population growth rate as a percent, and almost uniformly in areas where you have high female literacy rate, and this is just reading and writing, you have a much lower TFR. All right, the survivorship curve, which we saw for the first time when we were talking about carrying capacity for animals. In the one for animals, type 1 are animals that live for a long time before they die, like rhinos. And guys, when you're reading a graph, don't sit there and look at the shape and go, what's going on? Please look at the X and Y axes first. Down here, this is the time how long the organism lives, and the X or just how much time passes, and then the Y axis is the percent of population surviving. So X axis is time passing, Y is the percent surviving. In countries where most people don't die until they're old, that would be developed countries. Type 3 would be very poor countries in which many children die. And then type 2, similar rates at all ages, you hardly ever see this. All right, just realize if I ever say the words demographic trap, it's the same as demographic fatigue, which we've already gone over. All right, the form of a heavy metal matters. When you talk about things like mercury biomagnifying in fish, and especially pick a fish like tuna or salmon, you can't just say mercury. It has to be methyl mercury. It makes a difference. That is the kind that gets absorbed into the body. Okay, here if you look at the difference between methyl alcohol and ethyl alcohol, same sort of idea. All right, know the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic. Epidemics are large-scale outbreaks of infectious disease in a country, and then pandemics is like global. Think AIDS. Know a bacterial, viral, and protozoan disease. Malaria is always the one to go to for that. And here's what's interesting. Insects are also becoming resistant to pesticide in the same way that bacteria are becoming resistant to antibiotics. So the very insects that spread disease, it's getting harder to kill them too. All right, be aware that the disease that kills the most people on this planet is the flu, and then AIDS, and then diarrheal diseases, where you basically die of dehydration. It's interesting to see that we die more of cardiovascular disease and cancers here in the United States than anything else. Part of the reason for that is those two diseases are things that usually don't pop up until you're much older. In other parts of the world, you don't live long enough to get those diseases. Okay, be aware of all the different pathways that one can become sick, and especially know who the vulnerable populations are. Fetuses, babies, young children, the elderly, those with compromised immune systems. Be aware of how bacteria are becoming resistant to antibiotics. And it's because we overuse them ourselves. We don't use them long enough to kill every single bacteria that to ensure that they don't survive. Pesticide use. Why is that causing issues? Because again, the insects are surviving longer, so there's more opportunities to spread these antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Dude, antibacterial hand soap is really only appropriate for use in a hospital. You don't need it. The only time that you need antibacterial gel is when you can't wash your hands. Simple soap and water gets rid of bacteria, and if you keep using antibacterial stuff everywhere, you're going to end up with just super bugs in your house. Plus, Your body is covered with good bacteria that's fighting off the bad bacteria. Let them do their jobs. Also, overuse of antibiotics in agriculture, meaning that livestock are given antibiotics as a way to prevent them from getting sick. That is leading to these super bacteria. How does it happen? High number of bacteria. A few of them are, remember, pre-adapted to be resistant to antibiotics. Because of this low-level antibacterial or stuff, antibiotics and all of that, the strong survive. The strong reproduce. And then what's really terrifying about bacteria is they have something called a plasmid, where they can put that information of how to be resistant to antibiotics and pass it to bacteria who have never come in contact with them before, and now they're resistant as well. Oof. All right, so be familiar with MRSA. It is methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. So this is a type of bacteria that is resistant to antibiotics. Best way to keep from getting it is just wash your hands with soap and water. You don't need to do anything else. Just be clean. All right, tuberculosis is another one that is resisting antibiotics. And again, if you get this and you have something like HIV/AIDS, it's not good. And we've talked about all of this. Just stop these. I'm not going to read these slides to you. Please stop these and just kind of take a look. And I don't know that I'll test you on these in the multiple choice. Probably, I'm not going to promise anything. But for a national exam, tuck some of this away. And then hepatitis B virus is another one. When you look at this stuff, it's always important to think, how is something transmitted? Is it a virus or a bacteria? These are all viruses. And what does it impact? Influenza, obviously, it's going to be your immune system, and then like your lungs. HIV is, again, a systemic viral disease. Hep B goes directly for your liver. All right. These are all diseases that are being transmitted that are new. So they've mutated from diseases that affect other animals to now being able to affect us. But again, not all animal diseases are communicable to humans, but they could mutate later. Again, if you find this to be fascinating, there are people who spend their entire lives trying to figure out what the next new big problem is going to be. And here's actually another way that that we are encouraging the spread of disease, and that's the keeping of pets, especially these more exotic ones like rabbits, hamsters, and turtle. Probably don't want to be doing that so much. All right. Oral rehydration therapy is nothing more than boiled water with a little bit of sugar and a little bit of salt in it that you basically force feed to people who have a diarrheal disease until they're over it. For example, cholera. If you can keep somebody hydrated for the first couple of days, maybe a week, they get over it. The reason they die from it is loss of electrolytes and fluids. And teaching folks good hygiene practices, and then also this oral rehydration therapy makes a world of difference, because if you're in a third world country, you can't just run to the Walmart for Gatorade. When I talk about toxic, this is what it's talking about. If you want to see some examples of things at different toxicities. All right, are trace levels of toxic chemicals harmful? We don't know, simply because we have no way of isolating all of them. And we also don't know about their synergistic effects, which is, what are they like when they interact with each other? And then maybe the toxin itself is not a problem. Maybe it triggers something else. So there's a lot we don't know, which is in some ways scary, but in some ways really cool, because there's so much more we have to be able to know, and there are things that we can discover. Remember, again, the difference between the precautionary principle in terms of toxicity. Precautionary is something is guilty until it's proven innocent. Here in the United States, we believe in innocent until proven guilty. So we'll go ahead and use something until it causes a problem. All right, Flint, Michigan is a place where since about 2014, so at least a year, the citizens there have been drinking water that is heavily laced with lead. And lead, being a heavy metal, goes to the brain and causes everything from the slurring of words to developmental disabilities to sometimes death. And that's especially true of the younger ones. And it was essentially covered up until here very recently, January 2016. Understand how this process works. It's not that there was lead in the river water that was pulled in. It's that there were high levels of here, let's see, high chloride levels, and that stripped some of the lead out of the old pipes, and that's what ended up being drunk. Okay, and this kind of explains it here. All right, Zika virus is also a new thing. Please realize that it's not harmful to adults. The harm is to fetuses, and we know it's transmitted by mosquitoes. These mosquitoes we actually have here in Florida, but there's also some evidence that Zika, not these other ones, not chikungunya or dengue fever, but the Zika virus may be transmitted through sexual contact as well. And here are the devastating consequences. Microcephaly, where you can see that the brain is significantly smaller, so you can imagine there's a ton of developmental delays. There could be issues even with just normal life functions. All right, vaccines. Necessary, full stop. I'm going to post the link to this on a classroom website. Give it a watch. Understand why it is that vaccines work. Not only do they protect the individual, they do something called herd immunity. Understand what that is. And I believe that brings us to the end of the supplemental material.